English translation 468th contact. Monday, 4th of August 2008, 14:17 hours.
Oh, what a surprise. But greetings and welcome. What brings you to me so unexpectedly? Is there something special about you? If I had known that you were coming here, but you did not make yourself noticed. Did you just get here?
The reason I came here is because I want to talk to you for a while, so I use some of my free time to talk to you. I came here at 13:45 HRs, but I was not bored because I read these pages on your desk. I find your prediction good as well as the good or bad. These two questions here, I think you also answered them well.
These are for special bulletin number 45, due out in November, which I gave Bernadette to finish some time ago. The questions and answers should also be published in English. But since you have already read what I've written, I think it is only right that I should also add everything to our current conversation when I call it up and write it down.
This is a good idea, because the statements, explanations, and information contained in these pages are important and of such value that they are also recorded in the report of the conversation.
I also want to add the phrase, good or evil, what is human nature, as a supplement to the goblet of the truth.
This is not only a good idea, but also a very good one, because it also explains how it relates to the good and evil of human beings in general.
Good, so you agree with Bernadette and me. But that now the human beings know later on, when they read the contact report, what we are talking about, I will add the whole thing to our conversation at this point.
Good or evil, what is human nature?
Basically, no human being is evil from the bottom up, because he is not genetically designed for violence and manipulation by nature. The abysses of evil, violence, revenge and retribution, dishonesty and hatred, as well as jealousy and falsehood, and everything else that is degenerate and unworthy of human beings, only open up in the course of life. And if these abysses of evil open up, then this often happens to such an extent that the human being who is addicted to evil no longer finds the way back to good. By nature, no human being is evil, violent, and degenerated in this form in one way or another, because fundamentally in no human being is a fundamental and genetically determined code of violence given. The truth is that the evil in human beings is learned from them during their lives, which can happen in early childhood as well as later in life. And indeed, there is not an age limit for learning violence, evil, and every possible degeneration, so that a human being who has led a life in a good and peaceful and non-violent way, even at a higher age, can suddenly fall into violence when he falls into the corresponding life circumstances through which he leads himself to violence. Given by the genes, human beings only have reaction patterns and protective programs, archaic reaction functions or reaction functions that can be traced back to early times with regard to attack, flight, or paralysis. Reaction patterns, therefore, which are also peculiar to many animals and are controlled by the brain. In human beings, by the oldest part of the brain stem. The brainstem reacts to every imaginable and acute threat to the conscious mind completely unconsciously, so that the conscious mind cannot control the whole reaction in relation to the threat. The unconscious reaction process through the acute threat thus prevents a control function of the consciousness, which has the consequence that the conscious of the consciousness only becomes aware of the whole through the unconscious perception and the feelings arising from it. If an acute threat, a danger, etc. occurs, then the brainstem reacts with an unconscious perception and thus also with unconscious thoughts, which take place without the consciousness of the consciousness being switched on. This unconscious perception and the resulting feelings lead to a lightning reaction, from which an attack, an escape, or a solidification results, and only then penetrates the consciousness in a conscious way. The whole thing is an unconsciously controlled protective reaction, which, however, has nothing to do with destructive aggression, and which only penetrates into the consciousness of the conscious mind as a conscious factor after the unconscious lightning reaction. If, however, there are unfavorable conditions and circumstances during this process, then it can lead to scandal, to destructive aggression, because the control of negative impulses is not genetically predetermined, but also has to be learned through a healthy activity of consciousness and thus through a healthy world of thoughts, feelings, and behavior. If the behavior of human beings is analyzed, then it is recognizable that everything in the course of their lives depends on their complex coping strategies in order to satisfy their needs, to solve their conflicts and problems, to correct their mistakes, and also to gain recognition from their fellow human beings. If these abilities are sought in human beings, then they can be found in their cerebral cortex, from which increasingly complex and better coping strategies emerge and allow them to live according to creational laws and recommendations, insofar as they grow up and lead their lives in this climate of fulfillment. But if he grows up or lives in a climate in which fear, brutality, pressure, violence, jealousy, torture, dishonesty, hatred, revenge, retribution, or other evil and degeneration are commonplace, then in the depths of the brain, the old early defense programs of attack, flight, and paralysis are intensified, whereby violent reactions appear. Depending on the type of evil, violence and degeneration, the same evil, violence and degeneration are very quickly seen as the only possible and successful coping strategy. Violence and degeneration as the only means of asserting oneself, and thus as the only chance to assert oneself against oneself and against other human beings or a situation, and to exercise power oneself. This behavior very quickly leads to habit, which usually happens in earlier childhood and cannot be discarded. Thus, human beings carry their learned evil, violence, hatred, revenge, and retribution, and all degenerations with them throughout their lives, which inevitably leads to temporary or permanent violence. There is also a permanent and underlying unconscious fear of suffering harm and disadvantage embedded in the whole behavior, which feeds a permanent and pervasive destructive aggressiveness, which further increases the state of fear and from this in turn raises the learned propensity to violence. In the end, the result of all this is murder and manslaughter, war and destruction, as has been the case since time immemorial. If a human being grows up in a climate of fear, violence, brutality, and degeneration, or if he lives in such a climate in adulthood, then he inevitably adopts its evil and negative forms by learning them and thus giving place again to the archaic or early defense programs of attack, flight, and paralysis, which inevitably leads to violence. This is because there is no impulse control in the conscious mind, because it has not been learned or simply thrown overboard. Consequently, a completely different pattern of behavior appears, which cries out for destructive aggression, for violence, revenge, retribution, jealousy, torture, death penalty, hatred, war, destruction, dishonesty, and otherwise for all evil. The entire nerve cell assemblies scream aggressively for attack, but escape and paralysis, as well as insidiousness, meanness, disgracefulness, contempt for humanity, and cowardice can also be involved in an attack. In this way, everything is networked with each other, whereby this network becomes particularly stable because, in addition to all the aggressions and degenerations, the reward center is switched on, and the brain is flooded with the messenger substance dopamine. This makes human beings feel self-confirmed, great and powerful in their aggression, violence and degeneration, etc., and this in turn leads to them becoming addicted to their violence and thus striving ever further for evil, triggering quarrels, war, and all the deaths and destruction to satisfy their reward cascades through the messenger substance dopamine. In this way, human beings mutate into evil. Aggression, violence, and all other forms of evil, causing murder and manslaughter, quarreling, jealousy, revenge, hatred, torture, retribution, wars, capital punishment, and destruction. Evil is rampant both in individuals, if they have learned it, and also in groups and whole peoples. It is not the question of good or evil, not the question of right or wrong that determines man's judgment, but it is man's learning of evil that then determines his life and way of life. In the case of individuals, it is loyalty to their own evil that determines their way of life. In the case of groups or peoples, it is group or people's loyalty to evil that allows people to be misused for religious, political, philosophical, or ideological delusion, for the death penalty, and for wars. But human beings are not born with a blind loyalty because they learn it through their environment. Fundamentally, human beings have a real conscience at birth, which strives for good. Thus, human beings are not born with an attraction to evil, but rather with good and positive qualities in accordance with the creational laws that every life should be born free of evil, destructive aggressiveness, or violence. So the truth is that human beings are born into the world with good and positive social behavior and are controlled by it, long before they even become aware of it. This does not mean anything else than that every human being who has violence, evil, aggression, and degeneration of any kind is responsible for it himself because he learns everything about it in the course of his childhood or adult life. By nature, no human being is violent, but he learns to be violent through his environment, through his parents, siblings, relatives, friends, acquaintances, and other fellow human beings. And he learns to be violent through the religions and sects that teach murder and manslaughter and other evil violence and evil, through politics and the military that order wars and spread death and destruction, and through the penal legislation through which torture and capital punishment are practiced, but also through violent sports, games and educational measures, etc. Thus, violence is learned from the earliest stages of human life. Not infrequently even in infancy, with evil being seen as the only successful coping strategy for standing up to other people and the whole environment. However, this destructive aggressiveness is not harmless, because basically evil is also directed against its own origin. Because the fact is that evil of any kind makes people unhappy over time, even if human beings are not punished for their violent or otherwise evil actions. So the reality is that sooner or later the individual will not be happy if he has done evil, because mental stability decreases with time, because the bad conscience does not give peace. The exception to this are human beings who have become completely brutalized and emotionally cold, irresponsible and unscrupulous, which also applies to those who kill as legal executioners or as soldiers, because they have the court or military order behind them and are of the false belief that they are acting in accordance with the law, so they do not have a guilty conscience. The rule for doing evil, no matter what kind of evil, is that over time the guilty conscience in human beings will be stirred up, and thus the mental stability will be shaken. And this psychological destabilization leads to severe depression, to an increase in the risk of suicide, and the danger of falling into addiction to medicines, drugs, and alcohol. And the fact is that the percentage of suicides, addictions, and depression is 530 times higher in people who have learned and become addicted to evil than in people who have not become addicted to evil. And this is also true even if the deeds were never avenged and the perpetrators were never punished. If human beings do not recognize that their deeds of evil are wrong, and if they do not make an effort to get on the path of good and right in order to walk on it from now on, which is quite possible for every fallible person, then they run more and more into their ruin. If we look more closely at the evil that human beings do, then there is something like a center of the whole, a half-life, so to speak. For the one who does evil, be it violence or crime in terms of financial gain, the whole is hidden under a cloak of power over other human beings or under a cloak of quicker gain. But everything reaches its climax, a middle or even a half-life, from where it starts to go down again or where a process of self-dissolution begins, the energy dwindles and mental stability falters, and conscience begins to stir. This is the time when the energy for the good has to come into effect again. When human beings become creative, constructive, and justice-loving again, because the true energy of life does not tolerate pure egoism in the long run. For some who have learned evil in life and live according to it, the time for learning and practicing good according to creational laws and recommendations and the constructive and justice-loving may come in the course of the current life. While for others this time comes too late to live a good life, namely only when Godfather Death approaches. Although the sense of justice of human beings is anchored in their brains from birth, it must be nurtured and cared for in order to be effective. This care is especially important when it is influenced by the environment, for the good truly depends on the firm will of human beings and on how they let themselves be influenced by their environment or not. Thus, human beings themselves must have, nurture and care for the good and must not rely on the environment in this respect. And this is not because the direct or indirect environment interprets the meaning of the good according to its own rules and according to its own discretion, understanding, and use. Good and evil are always connected with praise or punishment, whereby the question arises, especially in the case of punishment, how much of this is needed by man when he has done something evil, and whether the punishment helps to turn the evil in man to good. And exactly to this it is to be said that in many cases, punishment for the wrongdoers has exactly the opposite effect or even disadvantages and triggers thoughts of revenge, hatred, and retaliation instead of just a change for the good. The reason for this is that punishments only work there, and the fallible ones change to better and good behavior if the punishments are also accepted by the fallible ones, recognized as true and therefore also understood as a means to a good end. This fact limits the usefulness of punishment tremendously, because rules and punishments are only useful if the wrongdoers accept them and take the rules and punishments upon themselves to act justly, non-violently, and honestly. Only in this way are rules and punishments useful and bring important prerequisites for economic development, for innovation, commercial, and social success, as well as for technical, medical, and knowledge and wisdom-based progress, love, peace, freedom, harmony, and conscious evolution. Sim Ya Se Silver Star Center, 27th July 2008, Billy.
What the future holds in terms of the climate catastrophe, and that brings environmental destruction to the human beings of the Earth. A prediction.
All you human beings of the Earth, you are responsible for your well-being, for the climate of your Earth, for your planet, and so you are responsible for your own life, and for that of all creatures, for fauna and flora, for all nature and everything that grows, creeps and flees. You are responsible both as individuals for everything and also as the whole mass of humanity. Responsible for whatever thoughts and feelings you bring forth and whatever you bring about through your actions. Together with you people of all nations, who are responsible for everything that arises on earth and in your existence, your authorities and governments are in the forefront, and the following words of admonition are to be announced to all of you. To you individual people of the earth, and to you, the responsible persons of the authorities and governments, already in 1951, 1958 and 1964, and also at other times, through my prophecies and predictions. Authorities, governments, newspapers, organizations, and radio stations worldwide were made aware of what unpleasant things will arise in the future on Earth and among you people. At that time there was still time to be able to partly change the announced threatening things, while other parts, however, had to arrive unchangeably because they could not be changed any more. To this and to all what was predicted and prophesied, the following is now to be further explained. The first 8 years of the 21st century have now passed, during which the prophecies and predictions of the 1950s and 1960s have been fulfilled, as in all the decades that followed, up to the present day. Nevertheless, Despite the fulfillment of my prophecies and predictions, my admonitions have not been heeded, and as a result the evils that were prophesied have become more and more prevalent throughout the world and are now even more prevalent. Only very few men are actually the ones who took my earlier prophetic and predicting warnings seriously, and also take them seriously today. But the majority of you men of the earth did not care about it, and also does not care about it today, but continues to trample the truth underfoot. So you do not want to know, and do not want to understand that you yourselves are to blame for all the evils and disasters that are happening in your society and on your planet. Although there have always been earthquakes, seaquakes, landslides, floods, storms, droughts, volcanic eruptions and other natural disasters on Earth, because of the way nature has been acting since the beginning of time. You have now, through your own fault, increased all these evils to such an enormous degree that they cannot be stopped. And the main reason for all the evils that are rolling over you human beings, such as crime, epidemics, wars, hunger, inhumanity, and climate destruction, etc., is the vast amount of overpopulation that you are not controlling by strict birth control, but continue to irresponsibly breed it. And this massive overpopulation is to blame for all the evils and catastrophes of all kinds that appear, whereby in relation to the increasing mass of humanity, all evils, evil, upheavals, and all disaster also increase inexorably. So the future brings for you human beings of the earth still many more adversities, strokes of fate as well as misery, disadvantages, shocks and fatalities, which expand into various and tremendous catastrophes, because from now on the nature of the planet strikes back with even greater force on your madness of overpopulation and the destruction of the climate, nature and many kinds of life connected with it, than it has done so far. The time has already come for the nature of your planet to put you to flight in some places, which has been maliciously reinforced by the destroyed environment through your influence and therefore through your guilt in the last decades. Already today, whole peoples are fleeing from the consequences of the destroyed environment and the climate catastrophe, which is still trivialized or even completely denied by irresponsible scientists and know-it-alls. And there are many human beings, and even entire peoples, fleeing the dangerous effects of industrial accidents. Groups of people and whole peoples are also fleeing from the spreading desert areas, from rising sea levels, the destruction of fields and farmland, the mountains by amusement parks and sports facilities of all kinds, but also because the air necessary for life is being polluted by poisonous exhaust fumes which are harmful to health. Hunger also drives people away, often through the increase in the infertility of the soil, which through desertification can no longer be cultivated for food production. In many cases, however, the irresponsible aid provided by aid organizations from industrialized countries overwhelms the various peoples of third world countries with food, as a result of which the food recipients no longer grow food, or, if the aid recipients are still growing food, they can no longer sell their products, because these own productions are much more expensive than the food imported by aid organizations from industrialized countries. Not only the rising sea levels, as a result of the melting of the poles and the glaciers, but also the increasing demolition of the seashore and the loss of land are also gradually driving whole groups of people and even entire peoples to flee, especially those who live on sea islands, which are being increasingly and ultimately completely flooded by the rising waters. The mass of people who are fleeing as a result of all the evils and disasters caused by climate and industry, who are truly environmental refugees, and must also be called so, will increase to over 35 million in the next few years. But this calculation is only valid for the next few years, because the unstoppable and criminal increase in overpopulation continues to increase. So in just 45 to 50 more years, the Earth, all countries and mankind, will be faced with 200 million environmental refugees. In addition to this, there are a great many refugees who are persecuted for political, racial, religious or social reasons, etc. And this number will also rise to around 30 million in the next few years. The effects of environmental pollution are taking on forms which are constantly getting worse and more devastating and catastrophic in relation to the madness of the growing overpopulation. Drinking water reserves are increasingly being poisoned, as in Asia, for example, by arsenic, which is already killing many thousands of people every year, while in other countries, drinking water is becoming increasingly scarce and is ultimately drying up. Elsewhere, the habitat of many people is endangered and destroyed because the rainforests are being cut down, resulting in devastating climatic changes and uninhabitable areas, such as desertification or the advance of deserts into areas previously inhabited by human beings. More and more the waters are fished out. Species of animals are exterminated, or many animals are deprived of their habitat, as well as many fertile soils. Meadows, corridors and alluvial areas are concreted over, and thus nature is destroyed, as it is especially the case with hotels, holiday resorts, cable cars, ski slopes and military firing ranges in the mountains. This is in addition to the irresponsible construction of mountain slopes and lake and river banks for human dwellings and recreation centers, etc. The atmosphere is being poisoned with CO2 by exhaust emissions, mainly by too many cars used by those who do not use public transport for travel, work and shopping, as well as for senseless amusement rides or who could easily walk. There are also all those heating systems and industrial plants that run on fossil fuels and, despite filters that are inadequate, throw tonnages of dirt, particulate matter and toxic substances of all kinds into the air every hour. And whatever dirt and poison flies out into the air also settles back onto the ground, into the soil and into the water, contaminating the whole world of plants and animals, including human beings, with it. Also the vegetables and fruits, which are already contaminated by poisonous sprays and propellants anyway, in order to increase harvest yields and profits. All continents of the world are affected by the destruction of nature and the environment, as well as by the climate catastrophe and the exploitation of the resources of the earth. But this is only the beginning of the coming great evil, the ongoing catastrophe and the horror that still awaits you human beings of the earth. In truth, it is all coming to a much worse end, in every conceivable way, with the worldwide streams of environmental refugees ultimately degenerating and causing ethnic clashes such as those already occurring in the industrialized nations. And in fact, this is already the case, even if it does not want to be seen yet. Already there are more or less harmful, undignified, racist, inhuman, and religiously denigrating behaviors against refugees and immigrants of all kinds from foreign countries by natives in almost all countries of the earth. But the greatest evils in this respect are to be found in the rich industrialized countries. And for some time now it has been so far that freedom of belief is also being attacked, and the believers' liberal rights are being curtailed, with the main religions or their representatives of all kinds also getting involved. Thus the believers are denied their own meeting places and their own peculiarities, as well as the wearing of certain clothes and symbols and amulets, etc., whereby in this respect especially many members of Christianity exercise terror and denigrate the faith and the symbols of faith of other groups and peoples. And especially in Christianity, it is common to insult groups as sects that do not want to have anything to do with any religious beliefs. Overpopulation, a term that all the stupid and dim-witted among you human beings of the earth do not want to be aware of, in relation to the fact that the world is overcrowded by human beings, and that these can no longer be fed by it and cannot be supported by it. Stupid and dumb people with academic titles, that is, scientists, newspaper men, and know-it-alls of all kinds, do not want to admit the truth, and even claim that the whole economy, and with it, life will collapse if fewer people are born, and mankind is reduced by a rigorous and reasonably controlled birth stop. But also many of you human beings of the earth, who are simple citizens without academic titles, etc., and for the further breeding of the earth humanity, you are also not better, and think that your freedom will be reduced by a state-regulated birth stop. But your freedom will certainly not be curtailed when an appeal is made to your intellect and to your reason, so that you only produce offspring in a mass that reduces overpopulation, and so that life is maintained in the whole environment of the earth, which is not possible through mass overpopulation, because through it slowly but surely all life, nature, and the climate are destroyed without recourse. How stupid and foolish you must be as those of you, human beings of the earth, who, without any understanding and without any reason, do not recognize the truth and continue to muddle along in your rabbit-like breeding of your descendants. And how stupid and foolish are all of you who wear academic titles, are scientists or simply know-it-alls, and in cowardly fear of your dwindling profit and image, make false claims and lies and fool humanity by denying, simply not seeing or not being able to assess the truth with regard to the worldwide catastrophic circumstances and events that are caused by overpopulation. Academic or other titles are of no use in terms of truth, nor are all the big words that are just as stupid, silly as the demonstrably insane claim that the earth is a flat disk. In 1951 I wrote that the Second World War has found its inglorious end, which lasted from 1939 to 1945 and cost the lives of some 62 million people. Even nuclear energy was used to kill hundreds of thousands of human beings and destroy their cities through the irresponsible and criminal action of the United States when the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed by nuclear bombs. Unfortunately, however, all this will not be the end of all the horrors, mass murders, wars, and acts of terror if the people of all peoples do not finally become clever enough to remove their power-hungry government bosses from office and let them seize the hair banner. It is the people in every country that basically elect the rulers, usually, unfortunately, the wrong ones, who first make great promises and then, when they are in power, break war and terror off the fence and cast a spell on the people with lies and deception, thereby making them in bondage to the superiors and misunderstanding the real truth. But this will have evil consequences in the future, because worldwide, if the people do not intervene against it, the powers of the state will entangle human beings more and more in wars, terror, and hatred, until the whole thing takes on uncontrollable forms worldwide. Well, what I said openly at the time has since been proven true many times over, and for some time now the threatened monstrous things have become a worldwide fire and open fire. The time of transition has passed, in which the monstrosity that was predicted for the future of all earthly mankind and for the earth and its nature could still have been stopped. Now, no effective countermeasures can change everything for the better and best, but in the long run, everything can only be alleviated. A change for the better and best requires a very long time, which must be calculated in centuries. For this, however, it is necessary that you, human beings of the earth, as individuals and as peoples, as those responsible for governments, authorities, sciences and military, as well as all others responsible for the world. Its security and life make a strong effort to fight all evils and catastrophes that have arisen from your unreasonably grown overpopulation, to stop them and to take a positive path. But if you are not ready for this and do not do it, then you bring forth still more horrors, which become evil scourges of earthly mankind. So wars, terror, destruction and annihilation with thousandfold deaths and millions of murdered and dead through natural disasters will continue to burden your future, because your tremendously growing overpopulation does not allow any other possibility. Human beings of the earth, through your fault, all laws of nature have been thrown out of control. So all storms and natural disasters, hailstorms, blizzards and rain floods, tremendous floods, etc., are now the order of the day. Because of your overpopulation, you have turned the floodplain forests, floodplain plains, mountain slopes, lake, river, and seashores into residential areas. As a result, the wild waters of the rains can find their way into your homes, bringing death to many of you. Through your fault, the permafrost is thawing worldwide, causing landslides and avalanches, while earthquakes, seaquakes, volcanic eruptions, and violent storms bring death, destruction, and doom. And everything continues to increase: the hurricanes and typhoons, the hurricanes and tornadoes, which become more and more powerful and destructive. And all of this is only your overpopulation to blame, because through it and its tremendous negative excesses, all evils and all natural disasters, but also all human disasters of every kind, are caused. The unnatural climate change, further wars, crimes, diseases, epidemics, and the whole global terrorism and fanatical religious delusion, etc., are malicious consequences of overpopulation. And all of this has an extremely detrimental effect on all your earthly humanity. The immense masses and weights of your cities and villages are salivating the inner structures of the earth to an ever-increasing degree, pushing the tectonic plates to shift, causing earthquakes and seaquakes that claim hundreds of thousands and ultimately millions of human lives. All earthquakes, however, also have an impact on the whole earthly volcanism, worldwide on the volcanoes, which are often connected with each other at great depths and which are becoming increasingly frequent and destructive. This also claims many human lives, especially in those areas where homes are unreasonably built close to the volcanoes. But this is not enough, for the irresponsibly growing overpopulation is giving rise to many other new, enormous and unsolvable problems, also with regard to famine, which is increasing the longer the more the overpopulation grows. Diseases which were thought to have been eradicated are returning, along with new diseases and epidemics which will claim many human beings as victims. Through mass tourism, the stream of economic refugees from all over the world is also growing, because what tourists from the rich industrial countries show the inhabitants of the poor tourist countries, they also want to have. As a result, they flee their home countries and, as economic refugees, are increasingly seeking the luxury life in the rich countries. The problem of asylum seekers, together with the stream of environmental refugees and the stream of persecuted people, is also increasing and becomes unsolvable. It has come about, as predicted in 1951, that the end of the 1980s saw the collapse of the economic boom and the outbreak of an enormous and unprecedented level of unemployment worldwide, resulting in an increase in crime by the unemployed, drug addicts and workaholics, as well as in crime by criminals who are not afraid to commit murder when they pursue their crimes and misdeeds. The national debts of various countries also increased immensely, as did terrorist activities. prostitution took on unbelievable forms of socialization and was brought out into the public in such a way that even children are not spared from it today. Prostitution became an honorable profession, officially recognized by the authorities and also subject to taxation. Television became as much a part of everyday life in every family as computer technology. And both television and computers became the main information media, as well as the most important forms of public prostitution advertising. You human beings of the earth, very many of you became cold in your thoughts and feelings during the last 60 years, whereby today your interpersonal relationships bring to light ever stranger blossoms, because everything is only intended for you, also your relationship with your neighbor. True love has become a rarity for you, and you no longer enter into marriages out of affection for one another, but only to make profit, to cultivate your image, and to be able to indulge in a certain status, which is traded with prestige and money. These marriages that are entered into in this way no longer last. Consequently, more and more families are destroyed, and even the children are sexually abused, while others become antisocial and neglected because their parents do not take care of them. Many of you human beings on Earth lead a life that is often only oriented towards drugs, addiction, vice, and pleasure, and is destructive and disharmonious. In many cases, your psyche is affected and your whole behavior has become negative. You human beings of the earth, you yourselves are the originators of all the evils and disasters that are rampant on your world, whereby you have created the real cause by driving your overpopulation into higher and higher numbers and driving the number even higher. So you yourselves are responsible for everything, and therefore in your own person also God, and as such, you yourselves determine your tremendous problems and excesses. You, who megalomaniacally believe to be the highest and most powerful being in the universe, far higher than the creation ever can be, from which everything originated. Through your guilt, through your overpopulation, through your megalomania, through your unreasonableness and self-importance, you challenge all the forces of nature, which is rearing up together with the earth and is resisting your degenerated machinations. So the forces of nature overflow on earth, together with the earth itself, because you human beings of earth have disturbed the entire natural course of the elements and of life, and are destroying it. I have all this to say today, the truth as it really is. All of you now take the courage, you people of the earth, to reconsider what has been revealed, to draw the right conclusions from it, and to act correctly from now on. There is still very little time to do this, to avoid the greatest of catastrophes, but you must make use of this time, because it is running between your fingers. Remember this truth and act in the right way so that you make a change for the better. Make public all that you have experienced through the words that have been spoken. Teach it to all the human beings of the earth. Teach it in all your media, so that you may bring about change and transformation in a positive sense. Only if you act rationally, as you have been made aware, will you save yourselves from even greater unhappiness, from even greater evils, from further degeneration, from many new deaths and destruction, and from the step into final destruction. All of you, human beings of the earth, who feel devoted to these words of truth, you have the good opportunity, as it was already called to you in 1951, 1958, and 1964, to use your power in responsibility and to protect the earth and all of humanity from all that is also now revealed to you in new words. Do not hesitate, but act, and do it quickly, because time is pressing. Act immediately to prevent worse than has already happened and is happening now. Act without delay, for you are also responsible if the future brings much worse for Earth and your humanity than is already being conjured up and realized through your fault. Sim Se Silver Star Center, 20th July 2008, 19:14 hours, Billy.
This is not true if you put these important things at the end of the book. In my opinion, the good or evil should be placed at the beginning of the book Goblet of the Truth, together with the introduction and the preface. This is contrary to what I said in the first place. But at that time I did not yet know that you were writing this good or evil, which in my opinion is important in terms of understanding the Goblet of the Truth, and should therefore be placed at the beginning of the work, together with the introduction and the preface.
Okay, then it's done that way, where the order of things is important. I would also like to say a few words about what the future holds, which would also be good for the beginning of the book, if you think it could be useful.
Without me seeing what you are going to write, I think it will be good, because as I know you, what you still have to write will also be good and useful. But you will please give it to me to read on my next visit. I would like to briefly review the questions from the bulletin readers and your answers.
Of course, here you go.
Thank you, Reeds.
Question in the OM and in an excerpt from the OM in the booklet. 49 questions. It is written that only the creation is worthy of worship, Verehrungswürdig, and adoration, Anbetungswürdig. But in contrast to this, it states in Figu in a nutshell, point 4, that the creation should not be worshipped or venerated. A person tried to explain to me that this results in a contradiction.
Answer. This does not deal with a contradiction, but rather an obvious lack of understanding of the facts of the true meaning of the words by a person who has not worked with the spiritual teaching Geisteslehre and its old style of writing. Consequently, this person is not familiar with this field and judges only according to popular and religious meanings without understanding the fundamental meaning of the terms. The old meaning of the German words as used in the Ohm, as for example Verehrung and Anbetung, are not the same as what is found today in the common incorrect assessment and interpretation of terms. The content of the OM does not date back several millenniums, but rather millions of years, and consequently various terms had at that time a completely different meaning as what those same terms have today. Old terms that are newly presented in the spiritual teaching and have a meaning and interpretation that is more accurate than what is generally the case with the common meaning in the present-day language, show precisely for the first time what meaning is to be truly understood by them. What becomes evident, especially in regards to the German language, is that it is not possible for it to be translated exactly and completely into another language to the extent that the exact meaning is conveyed. Truthfully, a translation capturing the general meaning from German into another language can occur only partially and through rephrasing, however, never in a complete and precise manner. The reason for this is the great many words and terms in the German language which specifically describe and convey very accurately definite values which are not found in other languages due to their poor vocabulary, whereby these languages are to be referred to as meager languages in comparison to the German language. From this alone, that the German language has for many things very clear, appropriate and precise terms which are lacking in all the other known earthly languages, misunderstandings arise, which is also one of the most important reasons why in regards to the translation of every Figu, writing that deals with spiritual teaching themes, or with every book with spiritual teaching content, the original German text must be given along with the translation. And because the necessary extensive understanding of the spiritual teaching text can only be realized when someone has a good command of the German language, Every human being who is interested in the teaching of truth, teaching of spirit, teaching of life, is urged to learn the German language comprehensively. In the old languages, as given in the OM, the various terms have often completely different meanings, as with those meanings in the recently given spiritual teaching and in the present-day general usage. Since time immemorial, languages have continuously changed and improved, as well as the meanings and their interpretations, which is particularly the case in regards to the words, terms and interpretations found in the spiritual teaching, and above all regarding the great many terms given in the OM. So, in the present-day usage of the German language, the word Verehrung has in meaning and interpretation the following negative qualities: idolization, homage, preference, given to someone or something, prostration, unquestioning, faith, devoutness, ecstasy, rapture, glorification, making someone, something a tin god, apotheosis, adoration, fanaticism, and in regards to Anbetung worship, the present-day meaning and interpretation have the following negative qualities: supplication, the act of pleading, imploring to someone, begging, craving, demanding incantation, invocation, magic rituals, the desire for something, someone, humbleness, submissiveness, the surrendering of one's self, personality, self-abasement request. Long ago, the term Verehrung, as it is used in the OM, had a completely different meaning, namely in the sense of honor, acknowledgement, recognition, honoring, praising, great respect, high esteem, high regard, to show dignity, and concerning the term Anbetung, as mentioned in the OM. Its meaning in the old days was approval, appraisal, appreciation, to show esteem, esteem, appreciation. The old terms, words and their interpretations in regards to Verehrung and Anbetung, as they are presented in the OM, represent a very high value in regards to the significance, greatness and respect for the creation. Contrary to these high values are the negative qualities of the present day, namely, viewed according to the understanding of the language, the values of the words, as well as their interpretation by the teaching of truth, the teaching of spirit, the teaching of life, presented anew and for the last time. Billy translation, Willem Mondrian, Switzerland.
Question: recently, we received an email pertaining to Billy's travels on foot. We have discovered some discrepancies. For example, in the Psyche, it states that Billy had travelled approximately 250,000 kilometers in 15 years, according to the Polish version of Guido's book. And yet they fly, page 91, it is approximately 35,000 kilo. In the German version of this book, und sie fliegen doch, it is approximately 350,000 kilometers in 12 years. In the English.German version of Guido's book, 2nd edition, page 53, it is approximately 3.5 million kilometers in 12 years. What is the correct data? Michael Saderbrock, Canada.
Comment from Christian Freener, which is now the correct version. I have found the following information concerning this in the 252nd Contact Report from the 14th of February 1995, Pleiadisch-Pleiadianische Kontaktberichte, Volume 7, pages 391-392.
Then something entirely personal. Quetzal once stated that I had covered a distance of 3.5 million kilometers on Earth, of which approximately 1/10 was on foot. What time frame does this apply to? No one has ever given me an explanation, and there are always differing opinions to be found concerning this. I would be happy if you could clarify this for me, provided that you are informed in this matter.
That is no problem. The travel distance applies to the first 40 years of your life. Included in the entire 3,500,000 kilometers that you traveled on your journeys on Earth are all the distances that you covered on and around the Earth with Sfath. Ask it my daughter Simyase and Quetzal, disregarding the many hundreds of million kilometers that you traveled in the Soel system. Within 40 years, you traveled approximately 1/10 of the entire distance on foot, thus around 350,000 kilometers. This corresponds to an annual distance of 8,750 kilometers and a daily average of approximately 24 kilometers. And that is really to be viewed as an average because you had often covered several times the average in a day, but also often much less, which was particularly the case in your childhood.
Answer. As is usual with the human beings of Earth, things are taken out of context when they concern dates, interpretations, explanations, and facts of all kinds of things, statements and information, thereby producing wrong misunderstandings, incorrect correlations, falsifications, and slander, etc. Thus, in this way, falsehoods of various kinds have been created with regard to the distances and number of kilometers that was covered by myself, Billy Edgeworth Albert Meyer, on foot, and otherwise also with vehicles, riding animals, and flying machines. In this regard, it deals with the kilometer information with the number 350,000 as well as 3,500,000, which are doubted, are disputed by know-it-alls, critics, skeptics, and antagonists. The information concerning the number of kilometers, however, is correct and is in accordance with the facts. And when other data is given in any writings or books, then this undoubtedly deals with transcription mistakes, or, what unfortunately is also possible, careless and cursory transcription errors, or even malicious falsifications, which unfortunately had appeared frequently for a while, and had also been printed as well as published. Such falsifications were unfortunately not detected, because they were overlooked or were always smuggled into the writings and books only after the last complete correction. This not only applies to figures and dates, but also to statements and explanations. In addition, several times after the last control of the final corrections, entire passages were also removed from writings and books, which was the case for important and interesting statements and explanations in the contact reports. No one could ever be identified to be at fault for all the inserted errors and removal of particular statements, passages, and information, nor for the many other peculiar incidents which occurred and still occur in the Figu buildings, incidents which are a real mystery and which no human being accepts as being true when told. Now, what is to be said in regard to the approximately 350,000 kilometers which I, Billy Edgeworth Albert Meyer, had traveled on foot on Earth is that this statement and figure come from the Pleiaren. The calculation for the number of kilometers covered on foot deals with the time period from my earliest childhood from 1937, when I learned to walk, up to the year 1978, thus a time of approximately 40 years. During these 40 years, I had therefore travelled approximately 350,000 kilometers on foot, and this is, in fact, based on information from the Pleiaren, who had recorded and had checked every one of my steps. All my steps and walks in Switzerland, as well as in 43 countries on Earth, in which I worked and in which I travelled as a hitchhiker, are included in the calculation. Concerning the information of 3,500,000 kilometers, this was calculated according to the distances I had covered during the 40 years from 1937 to 1978 on foot, and with the use of vehicles of all kinds, ships, riding animals, helicopters, small airplanes, and beamships. This distance of somewhat more than 3,500,000 kilometers includes the 350,000 kilometers I had traveled on the good Mother Earth and in her airspace, on foot, with all types of earthly transportation, means such as vehicles, riding animals, boats, and aircraft, The remaining distance of around 3,150,000 kilometers, however, was covered in the Earth's airspace and in the region of space round the Earth with Svarth, Asket, and Sim-Yor-Se in their beamships. In addition to this comes the many hundreds of millions of kilometers flown in outer space beyond the Earth to far beyond the area of the Sol system with Svarth, Asket, Sim-Yor-Se, and Quetzal, but the number of kilometers is just as unknown to me as is the enormous number of light years to the Dal universe, which I visited in 1975 when I was allowed to go on my great journey with Sim-Yor-Se and her father, Ptah. Billy translation, Willem Mondria, Switzerland.
The number of light years I have traveled on the great journey with you is unknown to me.
I guess this one is not important. It must be enough that it was many billions of light years.
I agree. Now, you came here to talk to me, but can I ask you 1, 2, 3 questions before we get down to business?
That is unquestionable, Edward.
Fine, thank you. All right then. During your last visit, you mentioned something about a bird epidemic that is even worse and more dangerous than the one that has been occurring for years in various countries, the emerging one. You said that birds have been affected by this even more dangerous and mutated disease for decades, and that the origin of the disease is in Nigeria. You also said something about dangerous sandflies, which, like the tiger mosquitoes from Italy and from Ticino, where they were brought in with various goods from Asia, are spreading from the southern areas more and more to the north, as well as the colored ticks, which, just like normal ticks, spread serious diseases. You said something about Q fever, which is very dangerous for human beings, because they inhale insect droppings that have turned to dust. You said that the excrement of the colored ticks decays to dust and causes life-threatening pneumonia when inhaled by human beings. But you also mentioned other pathogens that are transmitted from dogs and cats to human beings and cause serious diseases in them, and that this evil is spreading further and further into the Nordic regions, because the pathogens are adapting more and more to the cooler climate, which is also getting warmer and warmer.
That is true. And indeed, this bird epidemic is much more dangerous than the already known, and also more dangerous than the H5N1 virus. But we should not spread much information about that yet, because the time is not yet ripe. But I also want to say something about sandflies and colorful ticks, as well as about the fox tapeworm, which is infesting more and more human beings. Earth humans themselves are to blame for this evil, because the constantly increasing overpopulation is taking away more and more habitat from wild animals, as well as from foxes, which are carriers of the fox tapeworm eggs, and whose eggs are deposited everywhere through their excrement, and the fox tapeworm eggs' contaminated fur. And as a result of the fact that more and more habitat for wild animals is being lost due to overpopulation, these animals are domiciled in towns and villages, because there they find light food, which human beings throw away as waste products. But this in turn leads to fox tapeworm egg deposits not only in the wild, but also in towns, villages, and farms, which are then taken up by dogs and cats by contaminating their furs with the fox tapeworm eggs. These eggs are then again ingested unnoticed by those human beings who stroke, caress, take the dogs and cats to table or even to bed, whereby they then inevitably fall ill with the fox tapeworm. However, the process of the outbreak usually takes years, whereby the disease is not recognized until long after contamination, which makes an actual cure difficult or not possible at all. In addition to cats and dogs, mice are also contaminated with the fox tapeworm eggs, which are then caught and eaten again by cats, whereby the fox tapeworm eggs are also transmitted in this way to cats, and then again to human beings. Especially free-running and stray dogs and cats are therefore equally dangerous fox tapeworm spreaders. Apart from these animals, however, other living beings are also carriers of pathogens that are dangerous for Earth humans, causing serious illnesses that even lead to death. These are, for example, all genera and species of exotic reptiles and all kinds of exotic animals, but also cows, goats, sheep, rabbits, birds, and pigs, etc. Even scratch wounds and slight bite wounds can lead to very severe inflammation and sometimes even to life-threatening complications. And as far as the pathogens themselves are concerned, we know of some 760 pathogens in relation to animals, birds, fish, monkeys, insects, and all earthly creatures, which are transmitted to Earth humans, whereby the earthly medical scientists, physicians, virologists, bacteriologists, and parasitologists, etc., do not even have a clue about the full extent of the dangerous pathogens that are transmitted from all animals, etc., and from all creatures to human beings, and cause severe to most severe and fatal diseases. With reference to the domestic animals alone, which are kept unreasonably by Earth humans, we know of 136 microorganisms that are dangerous to human beings and infest them with diseases that can only to a small extent really be diagnosed by the earthly physicians. Unfortunately, this leads to the fact that many human beings are wrongly diagnosed with regard to their ailments and consequently also receive completely wrong medical treatment, which not infrequently leads to severe lifelong suffering of all kinds and even to death. And such infectious diseases, which are still unknown to earthly medicine, are constantly multiplying and spreading more and more. It is true that this is happening all over the world, but especially in the industrialized countries, such diseases are spreading more and more because of the unreasonableness of those human beings who keep domestic animals improperly, destroy the free nature, and force the wild animals to take up residence in the cities, villages, and homesteads. More and more animals are becoming, through unreasonableness, housemates and playmates of children and animal-human substitutes for adults, are fed at the dining table, kept in the living rooms, caressed, kissed, licked, and abused as bedfellows, which of course cannot remain without consequences for a while. And so it is not surprising that the pathogens are increasingly spreading to human beings and causing serious illnesses that often cannot be diagnosed by the medical profession. Scratch wounds of clawed animals are just as dangerous and cause nasty ulcers as well as fever attacks, etc., just as bacteria, fungi, and viruses transmitted to human beings are also caused by animals and all kinds of animal creatures. In many cases, pathogens are transmitted to human beings through the blood or saliva of infected living beings, including the widespread disease toxoplasmosis, which affects about 65% of Earth humans. Through scratch wounds of the cat, for example, also the cat scratch disease is transmitted to human beings, which is called Bartonella henselae by the terrestrial physicians. The cat fleas are not harmless either, nor is the leishmaniasis of dogs, which leads to death in dogs as well as in human beings, if they fall ill with it. This disease is caused by the sandfly you mentioned, which has already spread from the Mediterranean to the north of Europe. The sandfly is a blood-sucking parasite. Further, it is to be said in relation to dogs that they are carriers of various different types of Bartonella and other zoonotic pathogens, which, once they have found their way into human beings, cause severe heart valve inflammations. There are also pathogens that enter human beings via the respiratory tract, such as the pathogens of psittacosis, which is transmitted to human beings by avocets and parrots. The cloven-hoofed animals, such as goats and sheep, on the other hand, not infrequently carry the pathogen Coxiella burneti, as more rarely do dogs and cats, which can also be carriers of the parasites. This pathogen is omnipresent and in the faces of animals, and is responsible for the so-called Q fever and for a very severe form of pneumonia. The pathogen is also present in the amniotic fluid of pregnant cloven-hoofed animals in which it multiplies. If the animal then casts its body fruit, the pathogen then enters the outside world where it remains infectious for months, even when it has completely dried up. The actual originators are the colored ticks, by which animals are attacked and on which the ticks suck up blood and lay down on them the excrement, which then, with time, decomposes into dust and is whirled away by the wind. And since the tick excrement, and with it also the dust that develops from it, is infected with the pathogen Coxiella burnetii and is inhaled by earth humans, they suffer from a serious illness that can be life-threatening. So human beings do not even have to have direct contact with the parasite carriers in order to fall ill, which increases the risk of infection to the uncontrollable. Earth humans have an irresponsible attitude towards animals and all creatures, especially with regard to pets, such as horses, which, by the way, cause severe depression in human beings as a result of the transmission of corresponding viruses, and which are very difficult to cure. Cows, on the other hand, cause allergies and fungal diseases, while birds, guinea pigs, hamsters, and mice are responsible for many other diseases precisely through the dangerous parasites of which they are carriers. Rats, which are kept as cuddly toys, are also serious carriers of disease. And infected fleas also play a very important role in the transmission of disease, which is why the plague could spread through rats and claim many millions of human lives. But their feathers and hair also cause serious diseases in human beings, even if they are not infected with parasites. The stench of the animals and the creatures alone is pathogenic for the human beings, but this has not been recognized by the earthly medical scientists up to this day, just as the fact of the many pathogens that are carried by animals and by the creatures and that cause people to fall ill, to suffer and to die, without the medical scientists knowing the reason for it, has not been recognized either. Even very cleanly kept animal and gelatinous creatures are parasite carriers. The earth humans are irresponsible in their dealings with animals and all creatures, but as it has been since time immemorial, they do not allow themselves to be taught. Even today, and this despite the fact that terrible carriers of all kinds of pathogens are spreading more and more and are also being introduced into other countries from foreign countries. And the fact that these pathogen carriers, the parasite hosts, like insects and also animals and other creatures, are spreading from the warm southern regions and foreign countries more and more into the northern and colder regions of the earth, is not taken seriously enough by the scientists responsible for this. Just as earth humans in general do not take seriously enough the existing dangers that emanate from their domestic animals and cause them to fall ill, suffer, and even die.
It is really what you say, but something else. Recently I saw something on television about slavery still being practiced on Earth, even though it was banned about 60 years ago. Human beings as slaves today are said to be cheaper than a pair of cheap shoes. Worldwide, it has been said, 27 million slaves are being kept, maltreated, prostituted, and also killed when they are no longer useful to the slave owners. The TV show was a little thin in its coverage, so I would like to ask you if you can give me more information about the realities of what is happening on Earth in relation to slavery.
I can tell you a great deal about this earth human being's criminal shamefulness. Slaves are forced to work under such terrible circumstances that sooner or later they collapse, die miserably, or are murdered. Certain slave owners even keep their own slaves for the removal of slaves that become useless for them, who kill for the sake of money and bury the murdered in mass graves. And as far as the 27 million slaves are concerned, as you call their number, this is not of correctness, because our records, which according to exact clarifications we make anew every year, point to a number of about 42.8 million worldwide so far in 2008. This is many times more than ever before in the earthly history of slavery. In fact, slavery on Earth today is still widespread in about 150 countries, and this is also the case in the industrialized countries, such as Switzerland, Germany, France, Austria, the USA, etc. In the industrialized countries. These are cheaply kept household slaves and mainly sex slaves of both sexes, both children and adults, and they are also deliberately abused as such by officials, governments, and priests, etc., although this is not mentioned. In many cases, children are also held by their parents as prisoners and slaves and are sexually abused, especially in the so-called civilized, industrialized countries. The truth is that never before in the history of slavery on Earth have there been as many slaves as there are today. And today, the slave trade or human trafficking is an extremely lucrative business for many unscrupulous and irresponsible slave traders, who are themselves located in the administrations of the authorities and governments and enjoy protection and freedom as a result of their office. The slave business is flourishing worldwide and is the third most lucrative business after drugs and weapons and continues to grow. The Earth human being has become a cheap commodity, which is simply murdered, buried, and replaced by new goods if they are defective, etc.
Yes, that sounds even worse than what was reported on the TV show.
It is really very bad.
Then I do not want to pester you with more questions, so we can talk about why you came here. But first I would like to ask you if you have anything unusual to predict for this month.
There is only one extraordinary event until the end of August only in Russia, and that is in relation to the magnitude 9.2 of an earthquake in the area of Lake Baikal. It will be in the last days of the month. In China, the earthquakes continue, especially in the area of Sichuan and Yunnan, where there will be more deaths at the end of the month.
A tremendous force. But now to what you're about to talk to me about.
What I want to talk to you about is related to things of the spiritual teaching that you have written for us. But your explanations are probably only meant for our spiritual leadership and for our sruts.
Of course, then, this is where the official conversation ends, which I will call up and write down later.
This is the meaning of my words. Then this